The child's small hands clutched a bundle of wildflowers, but the 30-year-old woman knelt before him, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Please, I beg you, don't walk away from me." Dust from the old West Plains swirled around. Them, the late sun throwing long shadows across the river bank. The boy, no more than 10, had eyes too steady, too knowing for his age. Behind him, the river rushed restless and cold, like the secrets he carried. The woman's bonnet trembled in the wind, her worn dress streaked with mud, but it was the desperation in her cracked voice that cut deeper than the roar of water. What could drive a grown woman to beg a child? Whispered a voice from the mesquite trees. A man stepped into the clearing, a warrior, tall, broad-shouldered, his chest bare beneath the beaded necklace that caught the dying light. His long black hair flowed like a banner of midnight, his face carved with the quiet strength of someone who had seen too much of war and too little of peace. He stopped, stunned not at the woman's plea, but at the child's silence. For it wasn't fear in the boy's gaze. It was power, authority, the kind a child should never hold. And in that moment, as the warrior studied them both, he realized this wasn't just a stranger's quarrel. Something had twisted the natural order of things, and what he uncovered here would shock not only him, but the entire frontier town by sundown. The boy did not blink. The river churned behind him, foaming white over jagged stones, but his stare held steady, unyielding, almost unnatural. The woman's hand shook as she reached out, but she dared not touch him. Her knuckles were scraped, raw, nails chipped to the quick, as if she'd clawed her way across the plains just to arrive at this desperate moment. The warrior, standing only yards away, felt the weight of it all pressing into his chest. He had seen women beg for food, for shelter, even for mercy at the barrel of a soldier's rifle, but never for the ear of a child. What binds you to him? The warrior asked, his deep voice carrying over the roar of the river. Woman lifted her head, strands of hair escaping her bonnet and sticking to her tear-stained cheeks. Her eyes were wild, pleading, haunted. "He knows," she said. "He knows what no one else should." The boy's lips pressed into a thin line. He shifted the wildflowers in his hand, stems dripping river water as though freshly plucked from the current. When he spoke, his voice was soft yet sure. "She's lying." The warrior narrowed his eyes. He had learned long ago that truth was a slippery thing, shifting like the wind across desert sands. Yet there was something in the woman's trembling frame, and something in the boy's defiance that stirred unease in him. The woman's breath hitched as she turned back to the boy. "I am not lying, Caleb. You know what you saw, what your father did." The boy flinched then, just enough to betray a crack in his calm. His fingers tightened around the bundle of flowers until one snapped, the petals scattering like lost secrets. The warrior took a slow step closer. "Your father?" he asked. The woman looked to the warrior as though seeing salvation in his broad shoulders and steady stance. "His father, Sheriff Gaines," she whispered, voice breaking. "The man this whole town trusts, the man they call just. He carries blood on his hands." The name struck the warrior like a lash. Sheriff Gaines, he knew the man. A lawman who preached order with one hand and clenched the other into a fist of iron. He had run men from their lands, crushed families beneath the weight of his badge. Yet no one had dared speak against him. Until now. The boy's jaw tightened, his small chest heaving with a storm he couldn't contain. "Stop," he cried, his voice cracking, though his eyes burned with something far too old for 10 years. "You don't know what you're saying. If you speak it, they'll hang you. They'll hang us both." The woman sagged forward, clutching her stomach as though the words themselves had cut her. "Then let them hang me, but the truth must come out. It has to." The warrior's gaze shifted between them. The woman's desperation rang of honesty. The boy's fear raw, unpracticed spoke louder than denial ever could. And yet, in the distance, the faint clang of a church bell carried on the wind, reminding him of the town's cruel order. He knew what mobs did to women branded liars. He knew what silence did to boys forced to carry sins too heavy for their shoulders. He took another step, shadows of the trees folding around his towering frame. "I will hear it," he said. His voice was low, commanding, carrying the weight of a man who had buried brothers in shallow graves for truths never spoken aloud. "Tell me what the sheriff has done." The boy dropped the wildflowers. They tumbled into the dirt, their bright colors dulled beneath the dust. His shoulders sagged as though some invisible weight pressed him down. And for the first time, his eyes shimmered with tears. The woman seized his hands, pressing them to her chest, her voice fierce through the trembling. "You saw it, Caleb. Tell him. Tell the warrior what you saw at the barn." The boy's lips parted. His small body quivered, the river's spray misting his cheeks like cold sweat. And then, in a voice barely louder than the water's hiss, he spoke words that turned the warrior's blood cold. "He buried a man there, and he made me watch." The warrior stood frozen, every muscle tight, as the last of the daylight bled. Across the sky, the Old West wind carried the boy's confession, scattering it like wildfire waiting for dry grass dot, and in that moment, the warrior knew this was no quarrel between woman and child. This was the unraveling of a town soul. The boy's words hung in the air like a noose tightening. "He buried a man there, and he made me watch." The woman collapsed into the dust, clutching her chest as if the memory itself had torn her open. Her sobs echoed against the canyon, walls raw and desperate, while the river raged on as though trying to drown out the truth. The warrior stood unmoving, the weight of the boy's confession sinking deeper than the river stones. He had heard many tales of corruption in the town scattered across the frontier, but to force a child into silence through fear, that was a wound deeper than any bullet could leave. "Who was the man?" the warrior asked, voice steady but grave. The boy's lips trembled. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the ground where the wildflowers lay trampled. I don't know his name, but I remember his boots. They were new, with silver buckles. He said he was coming to warn folks that the sheriff was taking more land than he should." The woman raised her head, dirt streaking her tear-stained cheeks. "He was from the ranch near Dry Hollow. I remember him too. Folks whispered he was trying to bring proof against the sheriff, and now he's gone." The warrior's jaw clenched. The sheriff wasn't just a tyrant, he was a murderer, silencing men who dared to speak truth. But what gnawed at the warrior most was the boy's eyes haunted, carrying the burden of a grave no child should have seen. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of mesquite smoke from some distant fire. Night was closing in fast. The warrior knew this was no place to linger, not with a secret that could light the town ablaze if overheard. "Come," he said firmly, gesturing to the trees. "The open land has too many ears. We speak more by the fire." The woman staggered to her feet, her legs weak beneath her. She clutched the boy's hand, though he resisted, dragging his heels. "No," the boy whispered, his face pale. "If I speak more, if anyone finds out I told you, my father will know." The warrior crouched before him, lowering himself, so his dark eyes met the boy's. His long black hair fell forward in the firelight's glow as he spoke, his voice calm yet resolute. "A man who forces silence through fear is no father. He is a jailer, and jailers can be broken." The boy blinked rapidly, his breath catching. It was the first time anyone had spoken against the sheriff in front of him without trembling. For a moment, he looked less like a frightened child and more like someone standing on the edge of choosing. They made camp under a cluster of cottonwoods. The fire crackled low, throwing orange light against the warrior's bronzed skin and the silver of his tribal jewelry. The woman sat wrapped in her shawl, trembling still, while the boy curled near the fire, his gaze fixed on the flames as though searching for courage in their dance. The warrior broke the silence. "The town worships your father," he said to the boy. "They see only his badge, not the blood beneath it. If you speak, they will call you a liar. If she speaks," he nodded to the woman, "they will say she is mad. But if the truth is buried, more graves will follow." The woman lifted her eyes, her voice a whisper. "What choice do we have? The law belongs to him." The warrior fed. Another stick into the fire, sparks rising into the dark. "Then we do not seek law," he said. "We seek justice. And justice does not wear a badge." The boy hugged his knees, face half hidden in the shadows. "You don't understand," he muttered. "He told me, if I ever speak, he'll hurt her." He pointed at the woman, his hand trembling. "He'll make her disappear like that man in the barn." The woman gasped, tears spilling anew as she pulled the boy into her arms. Her voice shook, fierce and broken. "I would rather die than see you carry this alone." The warrior's hands tightened into fists, firelight flickering across the scars that lined his knuckles. He had lost too much to silence before brothers buried, friends hanged on lies, families scattered by greed. He would not let it happen again. He stood, tall and unshaken, his shadow stretching across the fire. "Then hear me, both of you," he said, his voice carrying the weight of iron. "The sheriff thinks he buried his secret in the earth. But I have walked this land long enough to know the earth remembers, and I will not let it keep silent." The boy looked up at him, firelight reflecting in his tear-streaked eyes. For the first time, a flicker of hope trembled in his small frame. Fragile but alive, the woman held her breath, sensing the storm that was about to break. And far in the distance, from the town on the hill, the faint howl of a coyote rose into the night, a warning carried on the wind. The frontier was about to learn that even the strongest walls of silence could be shattered by truth, and by the warrior who dared to carry it. The fire had long burned down to embers by dawn, but the boy's confession still smoldered in the warrior's mind. He had not slept, only sat with arms folded, listening to the crackle of dying wood and the restless sigh of the river. By first light, he knew one thing with certainty. Silence was no longer an option. The woman stirred first, her face pale from a night of grief. She smoothed the boy's hair as he slept, curled tightly against her side as though afraid the world would pull him away. When she saw the warrior's unblinking stare, she whispered, "You mean to confront him, don't you?" The warrior rose, his bare chest streaked with ash from the fire. His long black hair fell heavy against his shoulders, tribal jewelry glinting. As he moved, "I mean to give this boy back his childhood," he said firmly, "and to show the town the truth they have chosen not to see." Her voice broke with fear. "They won't listen. Sheriff Gaines holds their respect, their fear, their livelihoods. The ones who stand against him vanish." She looked at the boy who stirred restlessly in his sleep. "If you defy him, you'll vanish too." The warrior's gaze swept across the horizon, where the small town crouched in the distance, its church steeple piercing the morning sky, its smoke rising neat and tidy as if nothing foul could ever dwell within it. "Then let me vanish," he said, voice low as the rumble of a storm. "But not before he is unmasked." By mid-morning, they were on the trail toward town. The woman walked beside the boy, clutching his hand tightly as if anchoring him against the weight of his secret. The warrior strode ahead, muscles taut beneath. The sun, every step a vow carved into the dust. When they reached the edge of town, the atmosphere shifted. The dusty main street bustled with townsfolk, women carrying baskets, men tipping hats, horses stamping at the hitching posts. Yet when Sheriff Gaines appeared at the far end of the street, it was as though all movement bent around him. His tall figure cut a sharp line, his polished boots gleaming, his badge catching the sun like a blade. His smile was wide, confident, but it never touched his eyes. The boy froze, breath shallow. His small hand squeezed his mother's so tightly. She winced. The sheriff's gaze slid over the crowd until it landed on them. For a heartbeat, his face remained unreadable. Then his smile widened further, almost too wide. "Well, well," he called, voice booming across the street. "If it isn't Miss Clara and young Caleb, and—" His eyes shifted to the warrior, narrowing slightly. "A guest." The warrior did not move. He let the sheriff's gaze weigh him, but his own remained steady. "Unflinching. Sheriff," Clara said, her voice trembling but clear. "We need to speak, alone." The sheriff chuckled, a sound that grated like gravel. "Now, Clara, you know my door is always open. But dragging in strangers from the wild?" His eyes flicked to the warrior's bare chest, to the beads and bone glinting at his collar. Folks might take it the wrong way. Murmurs rippled through the street. Women whispered behind shawls, men exchanged glances, and children stared wide-eyed at the towering warrior with the long black hair. The warrior finally spoke, his voice deep and unshaken. "This is no matter of gossip. It is a matter of truth. A truth your town deserves to hear." The sheriff's smile thinned. "Truth, eh? Careful, stranger. Truth in these parts can get a man strung up faster than a horse thief." The boy clutched his mother's skirt, trembling. Clara bent down, whispering fiercely into his ear, "Caleb, you must be brave. It's the only way." Tears welled in the boy's eyes, but he nodded, his small jaw setting with fragile courage. Warrior laid a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, his touch firm, grounding. "Speak," he said softly. The street grew quiet, silence settling like dust after a stampede. Every eye turned to the child. Caleb swallowed hard. His voice was small but clear. "I saw him. I saw my father bury a man by the barn. He made me watch. He said if I told anyone, he'd hurt her." He pointed at Clara, his hand shaking. "But it's true. It's all true." Gasps broke from the crowd. A woman dropped her basket, apples rolling into the dirt. A ranch hand muttered a curse, backing away. The sheriff's face darkened, his charm cracking like glass. "Enough!" He barked, his voice sharp as a whip. He stepped forward, boots striking hard against the boards. The boys confused. You'd all take the word of a frightened child over your own sheriff? But the boy's words had already cut deep. The town was listening. The warrior stepped forward, his shadow falling across the sheriff. "They will not only take his word," he said, his voice like thunder rolling across the plains. "They will take mine, for I will show them the earth. Where you thought secrets sleep, a hush fell, thick as smoke." The townsfolk shifted uneasily, torn between loyalty and doubt, and for the first time, Sheriff Gaines' smile faltered. The crowd held its breath. Dust swirled between the boots of men and the hems of women's skirts as Caleb's trembling words echoed in every ear. "He buried a man. He made me watch." Sheriff Gaines stood rigid, his smile faltering for the first time. His eyes swept the crowd like a wolf gauging which sheep might bolt first. Then he laughed loud, sharp, forced. "Neighbors, friends," he said, raising his hands as if to calm children. "Are you truly so quick to believe the babbling of a scared boy? My own son, confused by stories, by whispers planted by outsiders." He jabbed a finger toward the warrior. "By him." The townsfolk shifted uneasily. Some murmured agreement, but others looked uncertain. A man spit into the dirt and muttered, "Boy didn't look confused to me." Clara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the sheriff's performance. Confused? He trembles every night from the memory of what you forced him to see. Her face flushed, hair spilling from her bonnet. You made him watch you bury a man whose only crime was standing against you. Gasps rippled through the street. A woman clutched her shawl tighter. One ranch hand muttered, "Lord help us." The sheriff's jaw twitched, his polished smile cracking like dry paint. "Careful, Clara," he hissed, voice low but venomous. "Words like that can damn a person." The warrior stepped closer, placing himself between Clara, the boy, and the sheriff. His bare chest gleamed with sweat under the sun, his long black hair stirring in the hot wind. Tribal beads and bone caught the light as he stood tall, immovable. "Threats are the weapons of guilty men," the warrior said, his deep voice steady as a drumbeat. "The earth does not lie, Sheriff. The grave remains where you left it." The townsfolk murmured louder now, a nervous energy building. A few men stepped nearer, curiosity burning in their eyes. "Grave?" one asked. "What grave?" The warrior turned his gaze upon them. By his barn, a shallow mound of dirt, too fresh to be time's work. He thought silence would hide it, but the land remembers. A hush fell. People shifted, glancing at one another. Suspicion, once whispered behind closed doors, now took root in the open-air. The sheriff's face reddened, his voice rising. "You'll not speak lies about me in my own town." He yanked his pistol from its holster, the metallic click splitting the air. He leveled it at the warrior's chest. "You're nothing but a vagrant savage stirring poison." Cries broke from the crowd. Mothers pulled children close. Men stepped back, wary of gunfire. Clara screamed, clutching Caleb tight against her skirt, but the warrior did not flinch. His muscles tensed, his eyes locked on the sheriff's. "If you believe a gun silences truth, then shoot. But every bullet only drives suspicion deeper. Your town already doubts, their hearts already question." The sheriff's hand trembled ever so slightly. Sweat beaded his forehead beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He had ruled with fear for years. Yet in this moment, surrounded by watchful eyes, he could not force silence so easily. Then a voice rose from the back of the crowd. "I heard it too." All eyes turned. It was a ranch hand, hat in hand, face pale. "I was near Gaines' barn that night. I heard shovels, and I heard crying." His voice cracked. "I thought it was coyotes, but maybe it wasn't." The sheriff spun on him, eyes blazing. "Lies, you drunk fool." But the damage was done. The murmurs swelled like a storm. Another voice called, "Show us the barn." Another shouted, "If you've nothing to hide, prove it." The sheriff's pistol wavered, his confidence crumbling as the tide turned. The warrior took a slow step forward, his voice ringing clear. "Take us to the grave. If the boy lies, if the woman lies, if I lie, then let the earth prove us false. But if we speak true, let the town see what kind of man wears your badge." The street erupted with shouts, half demanding answers, half fearful of the sheriff's wrath. Gaines' face twisted, caught between fury and fear. His hand shook as he lowered the gun just enough for the warrior to see. "You don't know what you're stirring," he growled. "This town isn't ready for the truth." The warrior's gaze burned steady, unyielding. "Then it is time they learned." The boy clung to his mother's hand, tears streaking his dirt-stained face. For the first time, he looked not just frightened, but hopeful. And above them all, the sun blazed down mercilessly, as though the heavens themselves demanded the truth be unearthed. The crowd began to move, voices rising, steps turning toward the sheriff's land. The cracks in his badge had begun to show, and the warrior would see them split wide open. The crowd moved like a restless tide, spilling out of the main street and along the dirt path that wound toward the sheriff's land. Dust rose with every step, clouding the air, but nothing could dim the fire of suspicion that now burned in. The townsfolk's eyes. Sheriff Gaines marched at the front, stiff-backed, jaw clenched, his revolver holstered, but his hand never straying far from it. His polished boots struck the earth in sharp, angry rhythm, each step a denial, each stride a desperate attempt to keep control. Behind him, the warrior walked with long, steady strides, his bare chest gleaming in the high sun, his long black hair flowed in the breeze, tribal beads and bone catching glimmers of light with every movement. He did not speak, but his presence alone was a promise. The truth would not remain buried. Clara clutched Caleb close, the boy's small hand trembling in hers as they followed. His face was pale, but his eyes for the first time held a quiet determination. He no longer looked only like a frightened child. He looked like a boy carrying the weight of truth. The townsfolk trailed behind, a murmur of voices swelling into demands. Let us see. Prove him wrong. If there's no grave, you've nothing to fear. The sheriff's shoulders stiffened. He barked over his shoulder. Fools, you'll regret doubting me. You'll see, there's nothing here but dirt and lies. But as they reached the edge of his property, silence fell heavy. The barn loomed ahead, its red paint weathered and flaking, its doors shut tight like lips holding secrets. Beside it, the earth bore scars, fresh mounds of dirt, uneven, unnatural. Caleb froze, his breath catching in his throat. There, he whispered, his small voice slicing the silence. That's where he buried him. The warrior strode forward, his shadow stretching long across the ground. He dropped to one knee, pressing his calloused palm against the earth. The dirt was loose, the soil turned too recently to be mistaken for anything but a grave. His jaw tightened. The land remembered, just as he had said. The townsfolk surged closer, craning necks, whispering harshly. The sheriff's voice rose, desperate now. It's nothing. I buried a cow sick with rot. Would you dig up carcasses just to shame your own sheriff? But the crowd was no longer his. Doubt had seated deep, and fear had grown wild. Then dig, the warrior said, rising to his full height, his muscles taut, eyes burning into the sheriff's. Show them. The sheriff faltered. His hand twitched near his revolver, but the crowd pressed in, their voices a storm. Dig, dig. Two ranch hands broke from the throng, shovels in hand. The sheriff roared, "Stay back." But they ignored him, driven by the need for truth. The first shovel struck the earth with a dull thud. Dust rose. The second followed. The mound split open under their labor, dirt flung aside with furious rhythm. The boy buried his face in his mother's skirts, trembling as the earth gave way. Clara held him close, her eyes locked on the ground, every muscle taut. Then a sound. A hollow thump, different from stone or root. The crowd hushed, leaning in as the shovel scraped again, revealing cloth, dirt-stained and torn. Another thrust, and the outline of a man's body began to surface. Gasps tore through the crowd. Women covered their mouths, men cursed under their breath. A hat rolled loose from the soil, its silver buckle gleaming under the sun. Caleb's voice. Cracked, small but piercing. That's him. That's the man. The warrior stepped closer, his fists tightening at his sides. He had seen death before, too much of it, but what sickened him now was not the corpse itself. It was the sight of the sheriff standing rigid, his face pale beneath the brim of his hat, unable to disguise the guilt bleeding through every feature. You buried a man of flesh, not cattle, the warrior said, his voice carrying like a drumbeat across the crowd. And you forced your own son to silence with threats. This is the measure of your badge. The townsfolk erupted, their voices clashing in outrage. Murderer! Coward! Justice! The sheriff drew his revolver in a flash, desperation blazing in his eyes. The crowd shrieked, scattering back. Clara shielded Caleb with her body, but the warrior did not flinch. He stepped forward, his broad chest bared to the gun, his long black hair whipping in the dust-filled wind. "Shoot me if you must," he said, voice steady as iron. "But no bullet will cover what the earth has uncovered. The town knows. Your power is gone." The sheriff's hand shook, sweat dripping down his temple. His eyes darted to the faces around him, once loyal, now cold with suspicion. His gun wavered, no longer sure of its aim. And for the first time, Sheriff Gaines looked not like a man of law, but like a man cornered by the very truth he had tried to bury. The barn doors groaned wider, hinges squealing like some great beast awakening. The crowd pressed closer, breaths held, as shafts of evening light sliced into the gloom inside. Dust swirled in golden spirals, and then, piece by piece, the shadows gave way to the truth. Inside the barn lay rows of crude wooden crates, half buried under tarps. One of them had cracked open, its contents spilling onto the hay-strewn floor. Not tools, not grain. Bones, small ones. Too small. A woman gasped, covering her mouth. A man cursed under his breath. Mothers clutched their children closer. Sheriff Gaines staggered backward, face pale as death, muttering something no one could understand. The warrior stepped forward, his bare chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. His long black hair fell over his shoulders like a storm cloud, tribal jewelry glinting faintly in the low light. His voice carried over the stunned silence. "These are not just bones," he said, each word heavy. "These are the stolen children. Your sheriff has been trading their lives for gold." The crowd erupted, some in disbelief, others in rage. Accusations flew, voices overlapping in a storm of fury. The woman who had begged the child in the river dropped to her knees, her son clinging tightly to her skirt. Tears streaked her dirt-stained face, but for the first time in years, she looked unburdened. "It wasn't me," Sheriff Gaines rasped, fumbling for his revolver, sweat dripping down his temple. They forced me, but no one believed him." His lies rang hollow, the weight of years of corruption pressing down on him like a noose. The boy, his small hands trembling, stepped forward from behind his mother. His eyes locked on the sheriff. "You took them," he said, voice calm and chillingly clear. "You took my sister." A hush fell. Even the cicadas outside seemed to stop. Sheriff Gaines froze, lips parting but no words finding their way out. He knew, everyone knew. The warrior turned toward the boy, lowering himself to one knee so their eyes met. His strong, weathered hands rested on his thighs, his presence both fierce and gentle. "You are brave," he said softly. "Your voice has given them back their names." The boy's lower lip quivered, but he did not cry. Instead, he leaned against his mother, who pulled him close, her tears falling onto his hair. The townsfolk moved in then, a wall of bodies cutting. The sheriff off from escape. Some shouted for justice, others demanded chains. But it was the warrior who raised his hand, commanding silence. "Justice is not in your gold," he said, turning his gaze on them all. "Justice is in what you choose to do next. You let him rule because you were afraid. Fear feeds men like him. But fear can end here." The people lowered their heads, ashamed. Yet there was something in his words that sparked in them an ember of courage long buried. Sheriff Gaines, cornered and shaking, dropped his revolver to the dirt. His knees buckled. For the first time, the man who had controlled the town stood powerless, his authority shattered like glass as night fell. Torches were lit, and the townsfolk carried the bones out of the barn one by one. Each small fragment was laid gently in the earth under the open sky, prayers whispered into the desert wind. The boy placed a single wildflower on the mound. The same flowers he had carried when the woman begged him by the river. The warrior stood beside them, his silhouette tall and unyielding against the firelight. His long black hair flowed in the night breeze, beads and bones glimmering on his chest. He had not come for glory, nor for gold. He had come because the cry of the broken had reached him, and he answered. The woman looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, but her voice steady. "We could never repay you." He shook his head slowly. "You do not owe me. Protect your children. Honor the truth. That is enough." The boy took the warrior's hand then, small fingers curling around his calloused palm. For a moment, the two stood together, past and future bound in silence. The townsfolk watched, and in their eyes grew something they had not felt in years' hope. When dawn finally broke, the warrior was gone, his footprints leading into the horizon. But the town was different now. Freed from the shadow of its sheriff, bound by the memory of the bones and the courage of a child, it stood ready to rebuild. And though no one could say where the warrior went, they knew this much. When the weak cried out again, somewhere, somehow, he would return.